Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. Today in the house, Amy Blankson. Amy, it's so good to see you. Great to meet you. First, a little bio, a bit about you, and then we're going to get into some serious digital wellness discussion. So, who is Amy? Not only happiness expert, co-founder and chief evangelist of the Digital Wellness Institute, and the author of several best-selling books, including something I think we'll get into, The Future of Happiness, 5 Modern Strategies for Balancing Productivity and Well-Being in the Digital Era. Now, Amy's on a mission to help create a more positive world that prioritizes digital flourishing. I love those two words together. That sweet spot where productivity, health, and happiness actually meet. Now, by harnessing a very simple research-backed framework, Amy and her team help reimagine digital well-being so people can thrive. Amy is also a member of the UN Global Happiness Council and a fellow of the World Innovative Organization. She actively engages in initiatives aimed at promoting happiness as a core value in society with obviously a digital wellness spin. Her work has been featured in prominent media outlets such as PBS, New York Times, Forbes, Huffington Post, the list goes on. She's the only person to have ever received a Point of Light award from 2 U.S. presidents and has over 15 years experience leading teams in how to convert stress into joy. With degrees from Harvard and Yale, Amy's continually recognized for her pioneering contributions to the study of positive psychology and its application in the digital age. What a thrill, Amy. Thanks for being here. Now,
Thanks so much, Dan.
I want to actually start back a little bit. 20, probably what, I guess 15, 16, you're writing a book. You publish it in 2017 called The Future of Happiness. And I would say that, the book is fantastic, but you were prescient. And we'll get into that, but here's where you're prescient. So right after, your kind brother does a very awesome foreword, you write the following words right away in the book. Technology is the biggest disruptor of happiness in human history. And so this is like probably about a decade ago that you're writing it. And again, published it in 2017. So let's start there, Amy. We don't seem to be happy. Not a lot of flourishing going on. There are pockets. Let's not kid ourselves. So there are some things going on, but we seem to be bumbling along this sort of digital unwellness path, which is implicating our sense of happiness and sense of flourishing. So what's happening, Amy? Tell me a bit. Get us up to speed. What's going on?
Well, that is such a great framing, Dan. I really love that because what initially I saw and the reason that I wrote The Future of Happiness was because in studying the science of happiness, we see that humans go in these kind of predictable cycles of fear. And initially, when we started our positive psychology firm, it was all about happiness and the economy. And then by 2014, 2015, there were rumblings around social media destroying the fabric of our society and what that meant for the future. And then it became happiness and health in the midst of COVID, and then happiness in the future of work, and very quickly now, happiness in the future of AI. And so you see these kind of cyclical patterns happening in the world. And at the time I wrote the book, I honestly felt like a lone ranger talking about the impact of digital on happiness. And it wasn't really until the beginning of COVID, when Zoom fatigue set in, that the light bulb started to go off for a lot of the people I speak to. And when I tried to explain digital wellness, all I had to say was, oh, when you feel Zoom fatigue. And they said, oh, yes, now I get it, right? And so in many ways, I think that helped accelerate the conversation. But with 2 decades in this field now, I realized that these arcs of change and behavior modification take way longer than we would ever expect. It took 50 years for us to understand physical health in the workplace, and another 30, 40 years for us to understand mental health in the workplace. And so I try to give employers and myself some grace in bringing this conversation about digital wellness into the forefront of our conversation, because there's just so much going on. It's hard to parcel out what's at the root of this and why is this causing us so much angst.
So interestingly, then, is it a bit cart before the horse, meaning the horse is driving us towards sort of technical innovation, whether it be AI or what have you, but therefore the cart is us, and sort of we're trying to play catch up somewhat to what these technologies are doing to us?
I think so. I think that that's a great way to frame it, actually, because the technologies were built, and many of the technologists have actually spoken very openly about the fact that they actually designed technology with different intent, and then there are these unintended consequences. Namely, Justin Rosenstein was the creator of the Facebook like button, and he said that his whole goal with the Facebook like button was enabling people to send out bits of positivity out into the world. And fast forward many years, and now we see how that has been a bit cemented, it's been commoditized, and it's changed the nature of business as we know it today. And so when we're thinking about the ripple effect to us as individual users, our awareness of what's happening takes a little while to catch up to things emerging in the marketplace. And I think it requires quite a bit of mindfulness on our part as human beings to really see those bigger narratives, what's going on, not just to hit the like button, but to see, wow, our landscape is changing, and I have a role to play in this that is important. So I anticipate it's going to be many years before we really capture the ability to create a huge movement to create change. But I think that movement starts today with how we think about these topics and how we start talking about them.
Well, another one obviously is Tristan Harris's infinite scroll dilemma, not only a social dilemma, but one in which we feel like often we're in an infinite scroll with whatever device is in front of us, which sort of brings up another line of questioning for you, Amy. And when I think about technology overload or communication overwhelm, you've got access to data. You know this. You research yourself. So whether it's over 80% of U.S. workers suffering from some sort of work-related stress related to digital overload, whether it's Deloitte study that 50% of employees, I think, feel overwhelmed by the daily volume of digital communication. Technology can isolate us, but it can also equally and ironically connect us. So tell me a bit about how you've, I guess, unraveled and then raveled back together the notion that technology is good and can be good, yet, however, there are these unintended consequences that we still have to grapple with.
Yeah. So I actually started writing my book under the premise that technology was making us less happy. And I got into the flow of writing and into the research, and I actually had to go back to my editor and say, actually, the research is not supporting that premise. It is not that technology is making us less happy. It's the way that we're using it is making us less happy. And that sounds like such a silly distinction. And yet at the same time, it's pretty profound because it changes the ability, the locus of control, and it shifts it away from this inanimate device, which truly is not intentionally hurting us or intentionally trying to steal our time. But we're letting it into our consciousness and oftentimes letting it drive our agenda. From the first moment you wake up and reach for your phone, your thoughts are being dictated by others that are shaping them. And so as we are trying to navigate this social dilemma for ourselves, I think it's really important that we really begin to be aware of how the devices are created, what's happening with the bigger trend in terms of marketing, social media connection, and then how do we find our place within that spot of figuring out, how much do you want to engage? And I always like to come back to this idea of thinking about technologies, when, where, why, and how. When are you using it? Why are you using it? How are you using it? How often are you using it? Just that little moment of gut check that says, whoa, pause. I'm going to think about myself and what I'm doing as opposed to just reacting. I've heard a lot lately about reactivity versus being responsive. And a lot of times we are reactive because we're kind of responding to environmental cues. But what we want to be is responsive to the people around us, really thoughtful and mindful in our approach. That requires us really understanding some of the interplay of these factors.
Well, and someone needs a good lesson on dopamine hits as well, I suppose, right? One of the questions I have for you related to this, though, are norms, meaning, a lot of the work that I get to do with organizations from a consulting perspective, when you think about people and culture, HR practices, are norms, organizational norms in particular. So, for example, organizational norm, when is it right or okay to send emails? Can you send emails after 5? If you are not in a country where it's prohibited, for example. Do you think, however, then that there is a culpability, but then perhaps the better word is responsibility of the organizations to be creating norms that are effusively more positive, I suppose, in the use of technology, so the worker, the team member, et cetera, the human being begin to feel less overwhelmed by the sheer tenacity of all of the technology demands on them?
Yes, and so I would say that yes, we need clearer policies, and there's a duty of care for organizations to really be clear. I often say that clear is kind. So if the policy is not clear, then people will stumble over it. They'll be in fear of it. They'll respond out of fear. But I think that policies are only one of four core business drivers that shape culture. So leadership would be number one. Are your leaders supporting these ideas? Do they back them up? Do they talk about them? Are they exuding the qualities that we're talking about here? Second would be policies. Third would be training. Are you teaching people, if you say it's okay to have boundaries, are you teaching them how to have boundaries? And the fourth is resources. So places to go to learn more, get support for when you do feel like you might be hitting a point of burnout. And so I think those four ideas in tandem together really help to shape a culture. But what I also love about what you just said, Dan, was you're hinting at what's called a communication charter that is one of the secret weapons of many organizations I've started working with. And it is this idea that a lot of times leaders follow unwritten social scripts in an environment, meaning that they follow certain patterns that no one's ever told them they have to do, but you just kind of think you're supposed to do. And one of those that we stumble on all the time is this unwritten rule about what it means to be responsive. Turns out in the research, it shows that there's a difference in geography, industry, age, and gender in terms of what you think it means to be responsive. So if you are a young man in your 20s in finance in New York, you expect other people to respond to you in 15 minutes. And you also try to hold yourself to that standard. If you're a woman in your 50s in the Midwest in nonprofits or education, your average expected response time from others could be up to a week. So imagine what happens when you put these two people on the same team together. Well, the gentleman from New York calls the woman, he texts the woman in the Midwest saying, why haven't you answered my message? And then she calls him back and says, it's only been 2 days. I'm working on it. And he said, why are you calling me? So you get this disconnect of generational preferences, timelines, and it feels frustrating. In fact, I would argue that this is the rub behind a lot of team dysfunction that a lot of people are experiencing. Add a layer to that on response time, and that we have so many channels for communication now. We've got Slack and Zoom. We've got Teams sometimes. We've got email, phone, text messages. And if you really need them, go find them in person, right? So there is some way that people will find you. And if they can't find you one way quickly, they will try all of the other ways. And so now you have 7 messages to answer instead of just one. And so let me bring this back before I make everyone stressed out listening to this, is that there's actually an opportunity to do what's called a communication charter. It takes under an hour or maybe an hour and a half tops for a small team to just align around, why are we communicating? How are we going to communicate? What does it mean to be responsive? How do we hold each other accountable? What are some consequences if people continue to step over the boundary? Which is really important when it is the boss who is causing the problems, and the employees need an outlet to be able to express their frustration before it causes a retention problem or other issues. And so just talking about what it means to communicate and how we're going to communicate can resolve so many issues in under an hour, and it doesn't even have to cost anything.
Well, I love that idea of the communication charter. Also, I think I need to move to the Midwest, but that's a sidebar note. I met and interviewed a young chap, I guess, sort of late millennial, about a week ago. His name's Ilya Knepelhout, and he's the co-founder in Amsterdam of a club called the Offline Club. And basically, the offline club now has had 15 or 20 events so far in the year 2024. And membership has grown through the roof across the Netherlands, that they're now beginning to entertain ideas of expanding it to other countries, which, as you can imagine, with a title like the Offline Club, is a sort of a 2, 3, 4 hour extravaganza at some place in the city. So that might be a library, it might be a coffee shop, it might be something that they've rented out. And, hundreds of people are going there to not be on a device. And it seemed to me that that seems to be like a personal communication charter. Like that's something that I'm deciding to do. I want to go join the offline club. Have you seen other examples where we as human beings, as the individual, can take back, our communication charter, if you will, to sort of be more present, and just what your thoughts are and from an individual responsibility?
It's interesting, and I love that example. I would say that this concept is actually not that new, although maybe the output and the mechanisms and the club types are different. I would say many religious traditions for thousands of years have come back to this framework of what's important to me, and let me shape my behaviors according to that. It is simply psychology to take this idea of behavior change and small steps that can create bigger change in your life. And I like the idea of a personal communication charter because it formalizes and codifies it into a structure that is repeatable. But this idea I know in Japan, there's a concept called forest bathing that's become very popular. And no, people are not in swimsuits. They are out there in the woods taking a hike. And so it is literally like letting nature wash over you and just being out there present. There's a number of groups that I've seen all over the world who are starting to crave having more offline interactions, specifically in response to the Zoom fatigue. And this is behavior. We see that in the same way that, when you swing too far one way, you want to swing the other way, and you just need to recalibrate, refine that balance. At the Digital Wellness Institute, we call that digital flourishing. And it is that sweet spot in between digital addiction, where you're all in, and digital detox, where you say, I'm swearing off social media for the rest of my life. I'm getting off of offline completely. I think the detox is very effective as a weekend activity, but not a lifelong strategy, because technology is ubiquitous. We live in this world. We have to coexist in this world. It's part of work. So I find it more useful for the long term to really focus on that sweet spot of flourishing, knowing that you are in control of technology, not the other way around, that it's there to serve you. And so when it's not serving you, you have to be mindful enough to say, wow, I've hit that point of no return. I need to stop now. And when technology is designed with an infinite scroll, or sometimes it's called the bottomless bowl, it's not the tech company who's going to be like, you know what, you should have really stopped by now. That comes back to us. And we've got to be responsible for ourselves.
Well, there is a reason Las Vegas exists, and they're not paying you to go fly into Vegas and sit at the casino, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay. I'm Canadian, but I think my new best friend, aside from you, is also the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. And so, as you and I both know, but listeners and viewers may not, in May of 2023, he and his team, with that 88-page report, basically indicted loneliness and said it is the new epidemic, as terrible as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So tell me a bit about your thoughts on where we're at with digital wellness or digital unwellness and loneliness, and sort of how do we crack that particular code, given the fact that we're on devices, but it seems increasingly more lonely.
I am also a big fan of Dr. Murthy. I think I'm going to have a fangirl moment here, but he speaks so eloquently about the need for solving an issue that is strikingly unexpected from a surgeon general. The idea of loneliness. In the midst of COVID, that's the topic that came out. And I'm actually not that surprised, because it's not just COVID that we went through. It was the coming together at the same time between the pandemic and also a technological revolution that I think created the perfect storm for loneliness. And I see it everywhere. I see it in individuals I talk to. extroverts who are fighting having to work from home, introverts who are fighting having to work in the office. I see it when I speak to some of my Japanese counterparts who have taught me about this idea called lonely deaths in Japan. And the idea of lonely deaths is that there are individuals who pass away and nobody knows that they passed away for a long time. And so there are many companies that will go into Japanese homes and clean out the home of this individual that someone suddenly alerted had not left their house in a long time.
Oh,
Horrifies me. It breaks my heart that that would be the case. And I don't think it's unique to Japan. I think this is a global phenomenon where we have people who fly under the radar. We are a less communal society. And I think that it is a deep call from ourselves as human beings to reconnect, to refine what's important to us in the midst of what has become a very busy world. And then that idea of the offline club is just it's a flag for me. It's a signal that there's a hunger out there for that.
gosh, that's disturbing. The fact of the matter is that both you and I have several children. I think you have three. I have three, and we have noticed within the Gen Z community this increase in, I guess, mental health issues. I would generally say. And so, without really saying this is just a Gen Z issue, because I see, I'm sure you do as well, pervasive increase in mental unwellness. So whether that's digital distraction, whether that's stress, tell me a bit about, again, what you see are some of the hopefulness in terms of this. I love how you're using the balance between, completely detoxifying and throwing out all your devices to being addicted 24/7 to the device. What is this, I guess, relationship with technology so that we can also get a handle on where this mental unwellness crisis seems to be heading right now, Amy?
So my husband is actually an adolescent medicine physician. So he sees all the teenagers and their digital problems. And I've actually chosen to work with adults because I think there's a huge need there as well. I think when we think of technology overwhelm, it's so easy to default to the kids, to think about the teenagers, to think about the people who are overusing technology irresponsibly. But what I find is that after you peel back that first layer of adults thinking about their children, I think then the microscope goes inward and we start to say, wow, I think maybe I also struggle with this. And it seems to me like, and I work with a lot of high performers and adults and high performing organizations, that there's also a curse of hyper responsibility, meaning that you want to be so responsive. You want to be that fellow in New York who's responding in 15 minutes to every email. You want to be the person who never leaves a project undone, who's always on top of every item, who checks off every notification they receive. And yet there's this unrest that becomes because it's physically impossible. The average adult right now is getting 323 notifications a day. And you could spend your entire workday just responding to people and never producing anything. And of course, you go home, you don't feel great about your work, makes your self-esteem go down, you bring that to the children have turned to their devices, and then you get this whole cycle, right? So let's come back to the hope of the situation.
Yes.
That can be kind of depressing. The hope of the situation, and part of what I've learned through this process is that it is true and real that there are a lot of problems associated with our digital world and technology. In fact, at the Digital Wellness Institute, we spent a long time modeling out literally every harm that could come from back pain, eye pain, stress, disconnection, loneliness, the whole thing, data privacy. And then we applied a positive psychology framework on top of that model, because I think it's not nice to scare people and then walk away. I also think that we have so much ability as human beings to make change. And so what we did is we said, for every downside, for every problem, there's an opportunity for a solution. And what people were really asking for is, what do I do about this stuff? If I know on the negative side that there's distractions, what does the positive side look like? And nobody had a vision for what this looks like. And so it's part of what we do at the Institute is we find role models out there in the world who are doing great work, and we highlight how they're doing it in real organizations in real time. And one of those organizations is ATB Financial, right there in Canada. We're
Oh,
a big fan of
yes.
their work, yes, and they have just done a phenomenal job of not only creating communication charters for over 3,000 of their team members, but they've also implemented digital wellness trainings. Their leader speaks frequently on digital wellness. They've created spaces and zones within their offices that are distraction free. They give employees time and space, even in the midst of a Zoom call, to step away if they need to. And they're very clear about their video policies. So there's this whole list. And in fact, we wound up writing a case study just about ATB Financial and the work they did. You can find for free on the Digital Wellness Institute website. But it's examples like that where that I think you could focus on the negative, but instead I choose that to give positive, to give the examples, to give the inspiration, because that's what a majority of individuals who are looking for solutions need. They don't need to be told they need to do something. They need to be shown it's possible, and here's how you do it.
So in the case with ATB Financial, and good shout out to the Canadians, by the way, that what I'm hearing though is that leadership plays a humongous role and effect. Kind of like it's shouted from the top, but it's also inculcated from the top. It can't just be, sometimes we see values that are on the front lobby and they don't mean anything, right? Or it's waxing lyrical, but it's not actually behaviorally put into practice. So is that where, like you started out the session today with me in the interview, leadership really is where it's at? Tell me, is that kind of what you're meaning?
It doesn't have to be, but wow, it's so much easier if it is. So I think if a leader can take the mantle upon them to talk about this, to lead change, to sit in the meetings, to dig down with your employees and talk about some real structural changes, and or just writing out social scripts that are clearer, that can be amazing. But not every employee has the benefit of a leader who's in that place yet. And so I like to continue to say, you may not be at the top of the food chain, but somewhere in the food chain, there are people underneath you. So do whatever you can that's within your power, whether that is, a team you manage, or your family, or even your dog. You can teach and learn some things from your dog. Like wherever you have a sphere of influence, use it. And eventually people will be inspired. They will see what you're doing, especially if you talk a lot about it, and then follow suit. One little bit of resistance that I have in for myself is that I have put in my footer a note that says that I don't respond to messages on weekends or when I'm on PTO, but I promise to get back to you as soon as possible. What that does for me is it doesn't change the people that I work with necessarily, but what it does is it creates a signal for those clients I'm working with, my contacts, that says, here's my line, here's what I'm all about. And I've gotten so many comments from people who've done the same thing in their footers after seeing it because it meant something to them. That's how change gets started. A lot of movements start with a 3% shift, and 3% is all you need to get 100% of people to begin to change.
It's like that first follower adage, right? I want to be the next dancer. Someone's got to put that in their byline of or email signature or what have you, right? It's like that permission. Who else is going to help dance on the hillside with me? Okay. So last question before we find out more about you and what you're doing at the Institute. So back to hope. So when you're a leader, and we talked about communication charter. We've talked about things like email signatures and giving yourself permission to say, look, you can be offline. It's okay. What do you envision, I suppose, where we need to go next? So when we're an organization, and you and I do a lot of work with organizations, what shifts do you think really are going to pay the biggest dividends in this shortish term period so that, organizations and the people that work at them feel that they do have a say in their flourishing?
That is such a great question. I think at this stage in the organizational life cycles, probably the biggest and most important factor is to have trainings on how do you create digital wellness.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because it sparks thoughts. It gets the wheels turning for individuals that we need to begin to create systemic change. So learning how can you optimize your Slack messages that you're not getting pinged at all hours of the day. A simple training. It can be 30 minutes or less about here's how you change your notification settings, or a conversation around how do you begin to structure your weekly meetings. I know Shopify made the news, I think it was 2 years ago, when they canceled all standing meetings in the organization. And I think there were some bumps along the road in the rollout of that idea, but it was interesting to watch as an experiment about what happened and how many standing meetings were completely unnecessary. So we're starting to get this pushback from people that says, if we don't need to meet, let's not meet. Another shift I've been seeing happen has been that instead of assuming all calls are on Zoom, I now give individuals the opportunity to choose Zoom, phone, or a walk-in talk. And not believe the number of individuals who not just sign up for the walk and talk, but that get really excited about being able to take a phone call on the road, get a little bit of sunshine, get a little of exercise. And that's just a little shift, a little permission. And I do want to hit on that idea of permission just a bit, Dan, because I think that has been an emerging theme I've seen with a lot of adults in particular, is that we feel like we have to work with technology, and yet we've been told it's not great for us. And so we constantly go in this cycle of being like, oh my gosh, I'm horrible, I'm on screens all the time.
Right.
It's not that you're horrible, it's that you have been given that edict, and now we're starting to be aware that that's a problem. And so what I like to do is to give permission to A, get your work done when you need to get it done, and B, when you're not working, what are you going to do? Because it turns out it's not so much about the amount of screen time that you're spending, it's about your balance between time spent online and then when you're offline. Do you have the impulse control to step away from your device, to not constantly reach for it, to not check your email right before bed? That's where it gets hard. It's when you leave work, what do you leave at work and what do you take home with you? And I think we have a lot of progress that we can make in that department. But again, that one comes back to the individual, starting with what's my intention? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up?
Reminds me, Amy, of a stat that InfoSecurity Europe put out about 2 years ago now. And they found, because of VPN connections, et cetera, that employees in Europe were doing 32 minutes of work from bed every day, because of course the phone is beside you as your alarm clock, so to say. And well, I might as well answer those texts and those emails, right? So we need to, as you say, that impulsivity, or almost that retribution to your own self. You're like, it's okay, you don't have to answer that text, or you don't have to watch a film with your family with your phone in your hand. You could put the phone in the other room or whatever, right? So fantastic. I feel like I've known you for a very long time. There is so much goodness coming for you. Thank you so much for this, Amy Blankson. Where can we find out more about you, your wonderful work, and of course, the Digital Wellness Institute?
Well, there is a fantastic opportunity coming up for learning more about this topic. It turns out to be Digital Wellness Day on May 3rd, coming soon. And it is our 5th annual celebration. Last year, we reached 7 million people.
Oh my God.
Day, which seems like it's counterintuitive for digital wellness. But we do have a strategy of using fire to fight fire. And that is that the best place to capture people's attention are the people whose eyeballs are glued to their screens. And so for me personally, I spend all day on Digital Wellness Day educating people about what it is, how they can practice, bringing in great speakers. I'll be doing a podcast as well, Lori Santos, which is really fun.
Nice.
And then after that, Saturday, Sunday, I unplug for the rest of the weekend because I usually need it. So it's about finding what works for you. What is your intent again? And then, and that's a great opportunity to learn more. You can also check out digitalwellnessinstitute.com for a lot more resources to learn about this topic.
So good. Can't wait to both plug in on Digital Wellness Day and unplug, just like an MTV Unplugged episode, I suppose, right? For you and I, certain vintage. Thereafter on the weekend. And two Canadian references. Look at that. Shopify and ATB Financial from an American who's awesome. I can't believe it. It's so good. Amy, can't wait to, I don't know, give you a hug face to face some point in the near future. Thanks so much for doing this. Not only did I learn a lot, I'm sure listeners and viewers did. You're doing such incredible work, and as I say, prescient and ahead of your time. So the world thanks you for being the Tristan Harris, I suppose, of wellness in a digital age. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
All right, folks, that was another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. Today, Amy Blankson in the house, co-founder, chief evangelist of Digital Wellness Institute. Thanks again, Amy.